Yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar tonight. What I'm going to do is take you through all the British spider families. So there's quite a few of them to get through, but I initially thought, well, I could take you through a lot of the microscopic features that separate them, but to be honest with you, you can get a lot of that information out of books, and I think it would be far more useful to give you a few field pointers and sort of point you in the right direction when you come across a spider running in front of you when you're out in the field, and just give you some background biology about the different families as well. It will make it a bit more broadly interesting for people. Okay, so how many families have we got? Well, 39, so that's quite a lot to get through, isn't it? So we're going to have to motor through this. What I'll do, I'll focus on the common families where there's a lot of different species in Britain, and I'll sort of play down some of the rarest families that we are unlikely to encounter because of their specialised habitat, or they're not generally found in the northwest of England. Okay, right, here's one that you may actually see in your house. So Unopidae. These are spiders that got 6 eyes. So most spiders have got 8 eyes in Britain, but there are a few families that only have 6, and this is one of them. They're very simple spiders, structurally conserved. I don't like the word primitive when you're talking about evolution because it's not technically true. These things don't have an external epigyne. They have a very simple epigyne in the female. They don't have an epigyne at all in the females. They just have a very simple genital opening. These are tiny. They're generally about 1 millimetre, 2 millimetres long. There's this attractive pinkish orange colour, the darker abdomen, and they prowl around the inside of your house at this time. So this is Unops domesticus. There is an outdoor version of this called Unops pulchra. That can be found in heather and what have you just by sieving. So quite common is Unops pulchra. You'll come across it, but Unops domesticus is strictly found in buildings, and you separate them on the number of leg spines. So consult books to have guidance on that. Under-recorded, so one to look out for. And I've got it in my house, and I've only seen it 3 or 4 times in 30 years. So it's not common. So do keep an eye out for it. Another 6-eyed job are the Scytodes. These are these spitting spiders, very attractive thing. We've only got the one species in Britain. I've never actually found one myself. They're interesting in that they've got this carapace area and abdomen are effectively the same size, so they look like a figure of 8. There's no other spider in Britain that's quite like that. It doesn't build a web to capture prey. It actually spits out 2 zigzag jets of sticky glue over prey, almost like a gladiator throwing a net over the prey item, and then it walks in and predates the prey item. So I will point out that many of these photographs are taken by me, but I'll actually put acknowledgements for the ones that people have kindly shared with me for this presentation. So that's another nice one to look out for. You can find it in houses. If you've got an ivy-covered wall, they often live amongst the ivy, so do keep your eye out for that one, and obviously record it if you see it. Segestridae. Another small family, 1 genus, 3 species. In the northwest, generally, you're only going to see 1 species, and that's the common Segestrius sinoculata. They build these lovely little funnely tube webs in cracks in masonry behind barking trees, and they have this radial silk that comes out, and at night they sit at the edge of their webs and wait for things to pass, and they pounce out on these trip lines to capture passing prey. A rarer one is Segestria bavarica. They characteristically have this long, thin, tubular abdomen. They don't have epigynes either. Very simple palp as well in the male. Very long, thin spiders, and essentially nocturnal. You're not going to see these out in the day, really. The other one of the 3 is Segestria florentina. That's a jet black spider, much bigger, and it's got metallic green chelicerae. Quite quite common down Bristol Way, London, that sort of area. But I don't think we have established populations in the northwest yet. But it's coming. It'll be here soon enough. So going along that similar body pattern of a long, thin, cylindrical abdomen are these Disteridae. These are the so-called woodlouse spiders. They've got these fantastic chelicerae jaws that stick out in front. They've got large fangs on the end, and they use them to essentially overpower woodlice. So they get them like a pair of tongs, top and bottom, and the lower fang pierces the underside of the woodlouse. They're another one with only 6 eyes and no epigyne. Very characteristic look. There's a smaller species called Alpactia holmbergi, which isn't red and sort of beige coloured. It's more beige coloured and brown, but they generally have this cylindrical look about them and don't create a web to actually capture prey. They just prowl about and grab it when they can. You can find them in silken cells when they're just balling up for the day. So one to look out for in your gardens. That vanishingly rare. This one, mice menidae. I should know how to find it, so I found one. But there you go. There's only 2 females ever been found in Britain, both in Wales. They live in the very deepest screes. I found this one in a slate waste heap up in North Wales, and I think there's one been found down on Gower in amongst limestone. So very subterranean, very tiny, less than a millimetre in body length. Makes a small little orb web and actually carts its egg sac around on its spinneret. So the egg sac can be actually bigger than the spider. Realistically, we're not going to come across this unless you're really looking in unusual habitats. So we don't fully know what the distribution in Britain is. It suggests it might be wider than it is, but yeah, deep scree is a very difficult habitat to sample. And I've looked multiple times at the location where I've found it and not found it any other one, so tricky one to re-find. Another interesting one, these are quite ant-like. These don't make a web at all. They're Zoderidae, one genus, 4 species. Most of them are introduced. I think there's some argument that one of them might be a native species, but I think realistically all 4 are sort of recent arrivals in Britain. They like gravel, coastal shingle, railway, clinker, that sort of stuff, aggregate, sorry. Hunt ants, their abdomens have got these characteristic tiny little seedy hairs all over them. So they scurry around very fast. When they hole up or lay egg sacs, they produce a silken igloo and cover it in bits of debris. So you can actually open this igloo up and the female spider will be in there with the eggs just loose within the sac. So they're effectively living within the egg sac, the females. So yeah, I'm not sure we've got any around in the northwest, but yeah, there's some thought that they follow the old Great Western Railway line because they work along the rail aggregate. So you find it in South Wales, one of the species, and Greater London, coastal shingle sites, always good to look. And you find it by turning rocks and you look for these igloos and then watch the spider zip across the rock and out of sight. This is one that you'll be familiar with. Obviously, the daddy long-legged spider, Falcidae. 3 genera, 3 species. There are a few other ones that get introduced now and again. Whether they've actually established in Britain is debatable, so we'll stick with that 3 genera, 3 species. The very common one that we all see in the house is Pholcus phalangioides. It's generally got a more tubular abdomen, very gangly legs, tends to sit upside down in its web and whir about when it's disturbed. So this is a thing that will be behind all your cupboards and what have you. There's a rarer one which has got a slightly different shaped abdomen in profile, Silochorus, which I've never seen, but yeah, one to keep an eye out. So just look at them in profile and see what you've got. They don't have a very distinctive epigyne either, really, and they've got very tiny chelicerae. Very typical, easy to see, and a large spider too. This is another recent arrival, so very small again, less than a millimetre long. Ocobidae. Strange thing about these is their eyes are effectively in the centre of the carapace. So there's no other British spiders like that, really. And they're very circular in everything, really. The abdomen's quite circular, the outline of the legs is circular. And these run at breakneck speed. If you disturb these, they zip across the wall. So they hide underneath a sort of sheet web that they construct, and then they go under it like a blanket. And yeah, very fast spiders. But I think it's only known from one site in Britain so far. It used to occur in the Natural History Museum in London, but I don't think it's been seen there for a while. So could turn up as it's moved around. It's one of these synanthropic species, something that associates with human habitation. So want to keep an eye out for. One of my favourites, the Atipidae, Atipus affinis. Now, if you're going to Warton Crag tomorrow, well, here we go. This is one to look out for. It's our only British mygalomorph spider. You often hear in the media, oh, it's the only British tarantula. Well, technically, no, it isn't, because it's not in the tarantula family, which are Theraphosidae. So it is a mygalomorph like Theraphosids tarantulas. But the characteristic of these huge chelicerae, and they axis in an up-down motion rather than all the other British spiders, which are more of a side-to-side pincer motion. Very shiny, not many hairs or setae on them, and effectively live underground all the time. So they actually live in a burrow and then extend this sock of a web off the burrow, and they cover this in debris. And then invertebrates will walk across the sock, and the spider will come out of its burrow, run through the sock and spear the invertebrate through the silk, cut a little hole, slit in the sock, and then drag the prey in and repair the sock, and then go back down into the burrow and eat the prey. Very thermophilic things. This one I photographed in Wales. It's actually coming out of a borehole in some rock where they've been doing some blasting. So I would like to say the build spider's quite tough in Wales. It's going out of solid rock. Obviously, it hasn't made that hole. But usually, they're in sort of loose soil, loose free draining soil on south-facing slopes. Quite rare in the north of Britain. Gets more frequent as you go towards the south coast, really. We've got another rarity here. This is Oxopidae, the so-called lynx spiders. Another one with one species in Britain, very rare. Surrey heaths, effectively. It's got massive leg spines, so you can't quite see it on some of these, but they're really obvious in the field. Very long abdomen. Doesn't make a web to capture prey. It's a free-living hunting spider. You find it amongst heather and whatnot. It's got a very characteristic eye pattern, so you'd probably not mistake it in the field for anything else. Maybe Pisora mirabilis that we'll see later in this presentation. But yeah, it's very attractive spider, very nimble on its feet as well. So we're not going to see this in the northwest either. But if you're down on some nice lowland heaths in the southeast, keep an eye out for it. Now then, Erichidae, a tricky one because it's Schedule 5 and I've never photographed it as a result, and I've never even seen it in the wild in Britain because it's highly protected and only in one little area at the moment. I think they're translocating it to some other nearby sites as well. These are the ladybird spiders. So adult male, very characteristic, velvety black with these white stripes on the leg joints, and obviously the ladybird pattern on the abdomen. The female, she's more velvety black all over with little isolated white hairs, setae scattered around. And they live in a burrow too, in the heathlands, and they extend it out with this special silk called cribellate silk. It's a sort of fluffy silk, which we'll see later. And very predatory on beetles as well, and very attractive spider, but extremely rare in Britain, so very unlikely to come across this wandering around, really. This was a BAS 60th anniversary cake, so quite appropriate, really. Okay, jumping spiders, Salticidae, very common, very numerous, very attractive. They're all diurnal species, so active during the day. They sleep at night. Very visual hunters. They don't make a web to capture prey. They stalk it and look using their extremely good vision. So they've got these amazing front binocular vision eyes to judge distance so they can leap onto prey, gauging that distance. They've got these eyes at the side of the carapace, which is generally quite a sort of squarish shaped carapace or a sort of elongated rectangle. Multiple colours, often very scaly hairs all over them. You can just see some on the abdomen here. Lots of different species, lots of different colours and patterns on them. So you'll be familiar with the zebra spider, of course, with its characteristic black and white colours. But there's all sorts. There's metallic ones, there's jet black ones, there's tiny sandy coloured ones, really diverse. And if you go to the tropics, you see a phenomenal range of colours of these. And some of them sleep overnight on silk lines hanging down from the rainforest plants. So you can walk around at night and find a jumping spider just hanging upside down by its spinnerets off a single strand of silk, obviously keeping out the way of predators while it's, well, invertebrate predators while it's sleeping. So there was a paper, I think, that showed that these things actually dream. They have a sort of go through some sort of REM sleep. It's quite interesting. So they're supposedly one of the more intelligent spiders, if you think spiders are intelligent like humans. But yeah, very attractive. Right, this is an awkward one. I never say these names, so excuse my pronunciation. So Miturgidae. It used to be in Zoridae, which was a lot easier to say, really. Only 4 species. There's essentially one is only common, the Zora spinimanima. They're free-living hunters. They don't make webs, and they sort of run about during the day and night looking for things. Leaf litter, dry leaf litter, you get one of the rarer ones. Some of the bogs will have them on as well. They've got quite characteristic striped, humbug-like carapaces and are very confident on their legs. They run with purpose. So generally a mottled abdomen too. So all 4 species look roughly the same. It's just the proportion of thicknesses of the bands on the carapace, and obviously the genitalia are different as well. But yeah, realistically, we're only going to see the common species in the northwest. Possibly one of the other ones, it occurs in North Wales, the Sylvestris, but yeah, I don't think we're going to see that. Was it Nemoralis? Can't remember. No, Nemoralis, Sylvestris is the rare one. Okay, another introduced spider. Now, this is a bit of a beast, actually. It's quite a chunky spider, and I understand it's one of these spiders that will actually defend itself. So if it feels threatened, it'll let you know and give a bit of a threat display towards you, so you back off. So it's I don't know, getting on for, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch body, possibly more. Doesn't make a web to capture prey, Zoropsidae. If you go to Paris, they're quite common in Paris. So it's generally a Mediterranean species, but it's using those heat islands of large European cities in the north to establish. It seems to be slowly spreading from London, so it's getting moved around Britain. So it's turning up in other sites across Britain. I don't think it's got to Liverpool yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's not in Liverpool. It's or Manchester or something like that. It only needs to hitch a ride in a builder's van or something, and it's here. It doesn't tend to live outside. It sort of lives in sheds or some more protected environments. But people who have colonies are familiar with them because they turn up indoors and will be seen in the corner of a room or something. So very mottled colour, very interesting. Doesn't build a web to capture prey. It It's another one of these that grabs things that pass by. So watch this space, really. Right, Pisauridae. Well, that's the nursery web spider I was telling you about before. This picture is obviously a fishing spider, the Dolomedes fimbriatus, this one, the commoner of the two. They don't make webs either to capture prey. They essentially amble around the grass or just sit and wait for things to pass by and grab them. But they're fascinating spiders as they're quite large and obvious in the field. I suppose you could mistake them for wolf spiders, but they're orders of magnitude bigger than any wolf spider we've got in Britain. They tend to have quite long, thin abdomens. This one's a gravid female, so she's quite swollen here. Pisora mirabilis is quite a tricky one because it's polymorphic, so you get lots of different colours from plain ones through to stripy orange ones with black bands on them. So if you come across a large sort of beigeish coloured spider in grassland that's got stripes on its abdomen and on its carapace, then chances are it's going to be Pisora mirabilis, nursery spider. So they only produce a web to house their young when they're about to hatch. That's why they sort of call a nursery web spider. Raft spider does the same. And the female will sit on the outside of the web and just guard them from predators, give them a head start, and then they just amble off. They're nice, attractive spiders, but realistically, unless you're in specialised habitats, you're not going to see the two raft spider species. It'll be Pisora mirabilis, which can be in gardens as well. Now, Lycosidae, another very widespread family in Britain, lots of species to play with. These are the wolf spiders, very agile, nimble on their feet. They're just starting to mature now, so I think most of the species are mature at this point of the year. Towards the back end of the year, you start to not see the males, so the males tend to mature first. Then you get the females coming in, maturing after a molt. Then you'll see the females running around with the little pale egg sac attached to their abdomen. Now, things like Pardosa, this is Pardosa trailei, the montane wolf spider. These are diurnal, so you'll see them out in the day. And if the weather's a bit overcast or inclement, they tend to hide the rocks and logs, keep out of the way, come out when it's sunny. There are some more nocturnal genera, things like, I don't know, let me think, Trichosa. You wouldn't generally see Trichosa out in the day. You'd find that wandering about at night. Alopicosa tends to be a bit more diurnal, I suppose. So, yeah, a good family to get to know. Doesn't make a web to catch a prey. Sits around in the sunshine, grabbing what it can. It's so fast, it could potentially chase down prey if it sees it, I suppose. One to get to know. Essentially, if it's a biggish spider, about a centimetre long or thereabouts, carrying a white egg sac on its abdomen or a duck egg blue egg sac, it will be a lycosid. Right, crab spiders, Tomisidae, another speciose family of spiders in Britain. Very characteristic shape for all the genera. Essentially, they look like a crab. The legs are splayed out at the side. They even scuttle around in a very crab-like manner. So they're not fast at all. They tend to walk sideways, really, and a bit like a crab, I suppose. That's what got their name. They often have these very unusual hairs, setae, on the abdomen that are club-shaped, particularly these ozyptelas. They've got very strong, robust front legs. So the front two pairs of legs, they're raptorial and will grab things. They're pretty aggressive predators, really. You'll notice some of the species will actively sit on flowers and wait for bees and butterflies to land and just grab them. And they can easily overpower things many times their own size. So they must have quite a fast-acting venom for such a small spider, really. So if you see a butterfly or a bee sat motionless on a flower, worth taking a closer look, and it could well be being eaten by one of these tomisids. Right, Sparacidae. Well, this is a bit of an enigma, really, because we've only got the one species in Britain that's actually native. There is another one possibly establishing now. These are the so-called huntsman spiders, much more common in the tropics. You've all heard of I think they call them banana spiders as well. They're the things that get imported in fruit quite often, and another family that doesn't make webs to capture prey, but they actively walk around and grab prey items. Adult female, absolutely unmistakable. This emerald green, brilliant looking thing. The adult males are slightly different. They've got less green and they've got a red striped abdomen. The juveniles are quite interesting. They look like they've got old-fashioned pajamas on. They're very pale. They're not green, but they've got very odd eyes. If you notice that the eyes have usually got a white shading around them. Now, most other spiders that are active in the day have this black counter shading, a bit like you see American footballers doing around their eyes. They put dark shading to stop them being dazzled. A lot of the spiders you'll see have got dark masks around their eyes to do the same, but for some reason these don't. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but very restricted. There is a really old record from Chat Moss, when Chat Moss was still a moss. Obviously, it's no longer really a moss at the moment, but there's an outside possibility that this thing could be hanging on in the northwest. So if you're in areas with, I don't know, oak woodland, saplings, glades, bit of Molinia growing in there, have a look. Vacuum sampling can turn up the juveniles, but definitely want to look out for it. It's quite rare now. Another one that's another free living hunter, doesn't build a web to capture prey, are these Philodromidae. They're the so-called running crab spiders. So like the Tomisids, they've got this very crab-like appearance. The legs are not as robust, but they tend to have that same crab-like look about them when they're running around. This is an adult female of Philodromus dispar, and she's guarding her young that are in this egg sac that she's sitting on top. So you can see the young are quite large in comparison to the female. You'll see these scuttling around on walls. You're beating vegetation, often in gorse, some of the commoner species. Oak has got a special species that lives on it, and a few common ones, of course. And that one that Gary was telling you about, the sand-running crab spider, the Rhizodromus phallax, that's one of these. But they've all got this very crab-like appearance and quite attractive spiders, really. But some of them can be very difficult to identify, particularly the females. You often need to dissect them and look at the internal structure of the genitalia to be certain on the species. Right, another real rarity, another Surrey Heath speciality, these Ulaboridae. This is the native Ullaborus. Now, we do have one that's more easy to spot, actually. You go to your local garden centre and look in the houseplant section, you might come across what looks like a little wizened leaf, I suppose, sitting in a sort of loosely orb web shaped thing. And that's the Ullaborus plumipes. I think someone's nicknamed it the garden centre spider, but I used to get it in some of the garden centres around here in North Wales, but I think they're a lot more clinical than they used to be, garden centres, and I think the throughput of plants is much quicker, so you don't find them as much as you would. Strange looking things, but often got this greyish, sort of scaly look about them. Certainly the native one that's on the Surrey Heath is almost ghostly white. It's quite a surprising looking spider. The one that we get in the northwest is Hyptiotes, which makes a very interesting web. It makes almost like a partial triangular orb web. And it stretches out the line, and it actually holds the line, so it becomes part of the web. It uses it as a sort of pulling mechanism to ensnare prey. That's in a few sites in the northwest. It tends to favour yew woodland, so maybe if you're up in the sort of limestone areas where there's some native yew wood, well worth having a look for that. And when I found one, it sort of reminded me a bit of a teddy bear. It was very unspider-like. It folds its legs up and it just looks very strange. So you could easily overlook these as dead bits of vegetation, really. So they play dead on the tray and then obviously spring back to life when you're not looking. Okay, Dictinidae. These are another cribellate type of spider. So this one's Dictina latens. I think it'd be moved to Brigitia genus now, so slightly different, but they've got very scaly setae on them. They're very small. And they make this very woolly, sort of flocculated silk that they live in. So you can see this is in a gorse bud, so you can appreciate it's a very small spider. These gorse leaves here, and this silk doesn't have any glue on it as such. It acts a bit like Velcro, so invertebrates get ensnared in that silk, and then the spider moves and captures them. So you can see fragments of prey items that have just been left in the web here. Very common if you're doing swooping in heather, you'll get one species of this as well, the Arundinacea. So yeah, not quite nice spider, very small. Okay, this is one I had to photograph just before the talk because I realised I didn't have a photograph of it. So this is Prefoecia silvicola. So tiny woodland spider. There's only 2 species in this family. You're probably not going to notice this because it looks quite like a juvenile of some of the more common spiders. I tend to find it up under rocks, high up in the mountains. So you often get that unusual mix of woodland species living on high mountains, presumably because they don't realise they're not in a woodland. They just know that they're in a more humid environment, which is similar to their woodland environment. So you'll probably get this in northwest, living in woodland, this Prefoecia. But yeah, it's not an easily defined family, really. It's just one of these that's best to get to know the common species so that when you see it, you'll recognise it. And it's hopped around different families in the past, so watch this space. Okay, on the other hand, this is a very common, obvious family. So these are the orb-web spiders, these Aranidae. 32 species by the looks of it. Very common, big garden spider that you see back end of the year. So September, August time, you'll start to see the adults maturing. So at the moment, they've only just hatched out of their egg sacs. There's little spiderlings, so they're starting to grow up. So you might sweep a few that look like this. Orb-web spiders, these Aranidae, they tend to have a really balloon-like body, very small carapace and sort of legs. So they're a bit out of proportion compared to the ground-running spiders because they're obviously spend their life in an orb web. The males tend to have smaller abdomens and a bit more nimble because they're moving around between the female webs. So a good way of recognising these is if you take them off the web and they're on a tray, they'll be very rubbish at walking effectively. They'll just bimble around your tray and not look confident on their feet at all. So heavy-bodied spiders like this, often very well marked, so you'll get some that's striped, humbug shaped. The underside of the abdomen of many of these orb-web spiders have got 2 parallel pale stripes. So even in some of the other orb-web families that I'll show you later. And that all just helps to disrupt the outline of the spider. So all these banded legs are quite common amongst some of the family members. But there are ones that are more uniform. So you've got the all green Araniella species, which are quite different in appearance. So if it's sat in an orb, chances are you've already limited it to just a few families. So it's always worth appreciating what the spider's web is as well, because that can hone down what sort of family you're looking at, rather than just potting it and then worrying about that back home when you've suddenly taken the spider out of context of its habitat. Okay, Therididae. This is quite a populous family in Britain too. So they're also a web spider, very heavy-bodied things that sit in a very tangled, messy web. This is I suppose I call it the infamous noble false widow, the Steatoda nobilis. Very timid spider, actually. quite big, but if you've got them, you probably won't even realise you've got them in your house. You'll see them at night coming out onto their web. You poke the web and they scurry back in as soon as they perceive you've been there. They're quite strong. They can take down bumblebees. So if you see a messy web in a garden centre and you see a husk of a bumblebee sat in the middle of it, chances are it'll be this species. So Theridiidae, generally very balloon-like abdomen, not very hairy, often shiny, uh, sometimes mottled. So quite an attractive genus. I think some wags said that they look like ticks with bloated abdomens, mainly. So I don't know. Interesting spiders. They call them comb foot spiders as well because the tarsal claws have got sort of teeth on them. Often think tarsal claws with teeth often means they're a web living spider as well. Because obviously they don't want the claw to slip too deeply into the web, so the little claws stop it moving too far, puncturing the web too much. Right. Another one of these that constructs an orb web, Tetragnathidae. There's four genera in UK. Metaline is probably the one you're going to come across. These little ones that mature now, low down in the grass and in shrubs. I think this is probably Metaline mengi. You get Metaline segmentata later in the year. Now, their orb webs are slightly different. They don't fill in the middle, so essentially it's an open hole in the middle. Aranidae, they essentially make a net in the middle as well. So if you see the web, you can almost put them to family just by looking at the web. One of the genera called Pachygnatha is quite interesting in that the juveniles start off in an orb web, but then as they get older and molt, then they become free-living hunters. So it's quite an interesting division between the sort of lifestyles of the different ages of that genus. Quite a common spider, Tetragnatha, obviously four jaws, so you might be familiar seeing the ones with the really elongated abdomens, and they tend to fold their legs in like this when they disturb their Tetragnatha. Four jaws because the males have got this special process on their chelicerae that engage with the female's jaws during mating. So it looks like they've got four jaws, but actually they haven't really. Clubionidae. Well, these are quite good because they usually got this strange body outline. So I like to think of them as having this sort of sharply pointed abdomen. They're another one of these that doesn't make a web. They're free living hunters, but they've got this mousy look about them, very silky hairs. I guess they're largely nocturnal, really. But they'll live in silk cells. So if you're peeling back bark, you might find one of these hiding in a silk cell, which they seal themselves into. So you often can't find them by vacuum sampling because they'll be tucked away in these silk cells and they won't vacuum sample. So if you're actually actively searching for them, you're more likely to break the cells open during the day and release the spiders. There's quite a few of these. A lot of them are common in gardens. So some of them have patterned abdomens, but most of the common ones are quite uniform in colour. So look out for some of the patterned abdomen ones when you're beating. There's Clubiona comta, which is quite a common one on garden shrubs. Clubiona terrestris, very common ground thing in the garden, looks essentially identical to this. So they're not really, well, many of them, you can't identify them in the field to species. You need to do microscopy to separate them. But well worth seeing. And the other nice thing about these is when they land on your beating tray, they often jump around like a Mexican bean on the jumping tray. So they'll fold the legs up and just jump around. So you can spot them doing that. Sort of very similar family of spiders. These, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, like Chiracanthidae, I suppose. They're like bigger versions of the Clubionidae. How they differ is that their front legs are longer than their back, and I think that's quite noticeably different to the Clubionidae. There's only 3 species in Britain. One's extremely rare, another southern heathland species. One you'll get on sand dunes, which has got a greenish tinge, so we do get it in the northwest. And then erraticum, which, as the name would suggest, turns up now and again. It's probably the more frequent out of the 3. You'll find them living in a sort of silk nest built into grass, and if you rip open the web, you'll find them in there, usually guarding their eggs. They don't make webs to capture prey as such. They are free-living hunters. So some of the ones abroad can give you quite a nip. Obviously not serious, but most spiders in Britain can't even pierce your skin, but these could. Okay, Nephosidae. This is a very attractive group, actually. There's a lot of species, and a lot of them are actually quite rare. So usually they've got this sort of uniform colour, black, shiny like this thing. There are some that are extremely well marked and with white spots and all sorts of going on. Generally, some of them are ant mimics as well, so they'll be out in the day running around like an ant, some of the Micaria. They build little silk cells that they retreat to, just to, I guess, sleep or hole up overnight. Some of them are nocturnal, so some come out in the night. Some are diurnal. Yeah, like I say, there's some rare ones to look out for in these. So generally like hot, dry, open environments. There's some that are a bit more sort of happy in woodlands, but by and large they like it out in the open. And Leocranidae, they're similar in a way. They often mature in autumn, so one of the more frequent genera is Scotina. They're little things that look a bit like wolf spiders, but they are free-living hunters, but you won't really see these scuttling around. You'll have to go grubbing for these. Find them under rocks, certainly Leocranum rupicola is a rock-dwelling thing, obviously. Quite nice. A lot of them are quite rare, really. I think the most common one up in our regions, Scotina gracilipes, which you'll find in heathland, really. So dune heath, Formby and what have you, and that sort of environment. Yeah, unusual things. They've got interesting leg spines that form a catching basket when they're catching prey. Okay, something slightly different here now. Theridiosomatidae. There's only one species, a very tiny thing, less than a millimetre long, and you'll only find this near water, really. So richly more eutrophic ponds, that sort of environment. You tend not to get it in the real acidic bogs. It tends to like more fenny environments, really. It makes a tiny little orb web, which it can even attach some of the silk to the meniscus of the water. It's that small. And the really attractive thing about this is that all these little patches are guanine, and they have a metallic silver luster to them. So in life, you'll actually see them, and it does look like it's been made of silver. So like a little jewel, really. And you can tell this is one and not a money spider by the size of these palps. This is still an immature male, but the palps are huge. They're really obvious even on the tray, even though it's small. It's quite distinctly different looking to a money spider that is about the same size, quite a globular abdomen as well. And the pattern can be quite variable, but they tend to have virtually all of them have this silvery look. This example looks a bit more white, but it could just be the way the camera's picked it up. Okay, Nesticidae. These are generally cave spiders, I suppose. You've only got 2 species in Britain. One's vanishingly rare and only found on Flatholm Island in the Bristol Channel so far. The other one's quite common. You'll find it in drains. Makes a sort of tangly web and carries its egg sac on its spinnerets. So it hangs upside down and trundles around slowly. So you're not really going to find this out in the open. It's always going to be in sort of protected, high humidity, constantly dark sort of atmosphere. So caves, sewers, under large rocks, thick marsh, grassland, thick wetland vegetation. So carex beds, sedge beds. If you route through that, you might come across that family. They superficially look a bit like some of the theridiids, but they have a thickened lip, so the labium very thick. It's got like a thickened margin that the theridiids don't have. This is also a family that looks a bit similar to the theridiids, the Mimetidae. There's only 4 species. We really only have to worry about 2 species, which are that's all common in our area. So you've got Cambridgei and Foucata. There's another one called Afana, which seems to be spreading rapidly. It used to be restricted to the heathlands in the southeast, but somehow, possibly with climate change, decided that it can live in gardens, in shrubs and what have you. So it could well be in the northwest. It's certainly made it to North Wales now. They're what they call pirate spiders because they effectively only eat other spiders. So they've got these, probably doesn't show it that well in this photograph, but they've got these leg spines that are in parallel rows in the front legs, which they open up like a catching basket to capture other spiders. So they invade other spiders' webs and kill other spiders for food. So quite unusual. You don't find many, and they make a very nice type of egg sac as well. They make an egg sac that looks a bit like one of those training punch bags hanging down on a thread with a teardrop on the end. And they've got sort of intricate different designs of silk on that, depending on the species. So you don't find them in big numbers because they're quite specialised things. But if you beat some gorse, you're likely to find one of the common species. Right, Furolithidae. These look a bit like ants. They're quite small and they run about. Only the 2 species. We do actually get both species in the northwest. So this is Furolithus minimus, which is the rarer of the 2. Characteristic, this reddish, ruddy colour to this species, whereas the common one is much darker brown, sort of chestnut brown. Open, dry habitats tend to run around at breakneck speed when you lift a rock up. Free-living hunters, they've got special spines on their legs to capture prey and obviously look quite ant-like. Yeah, nice little group to know, really. Then we've got the buzzing spiders, these Anaphinidae. There's one native species, which is Accentuata here, and all of them have this, I don't know what you'd call it, it's like 2 pairs of little teardrops, I suppose, almost like a little shamrock on the top of the abdomen. So all 3 species that are in Britain have that. Accentuata, the common one, it's very distinctive. Now, the other 2 species are another what I'd call a garden centre spider that's made London its home, and they're starting to spread. So you've got Sabina and Numida. They generally look a bit like this, but slightly paler. They'll be coming our way soon, without a doubt, because obviously people move garden plants around as they move houses throughout Britain. So we're likely to come across those other ones at some point, particularly at the rate of spread we've seen in London. So watch this space. But at the moment, I think we're fairly safe to assume most of them are Accentuata, but do look out for any that are paler than this example and check them microscopically to be sure. And they're called buzzing spiders because the adult male actually makes this buzzing noise during its displays. And I think there's a story of one being in a guitar and it actually buzzing and making an audible hum across the room. I guess that's where they've got their name from. They're not web builders. They're another one of these free-living hunters, and they're more arboreal, so you won't tend to find them on the ground. They'll always be in shrubs or trees. So generally beating is the way that you'd find this family. Okay, so I told you about the tribellate silk. This is this very common around gardens, it's Amarobidae. So we've only got 3 species of this in one genus. This one here is the one we commonly get around buildings, the Amarobius similis. So it makes this bluish, white, doily type silk that you'll see on larch lap fences and wooden sheds or stuff around the garden. So you'll all be familiar with this. It's probably in every single garden in Britain, in actual fact. Very characteristic look about them. 2 of the species have got a patterned abdomen. The other one, ferox, has got more of a sort of muted colour. It's all black all over with a rudimentary pattern on its abdomen. Interesting thing, because I think the young actually eat the female afterwards, so she pays the ultimate sacrifice in rearing her young. And how they make this silk, they've got this special plate on the abdomen where they exude the silk out, and then they comb it with this special comb on their rear leg. So if you go out at night with a torch, you'll actually see them doing this, and they're doing it at quite a breakneck speed like this. You see them doing it with their back legs, carding out this silk into this fluffy silk mesh web that they make. So something to do when it gets dark, I guess. Okay, this is another introduced species that's probably going to be everywhere at some point. At the moment, it's quite restricted. It's Plymouth, South Wales, Exeter. There's rumours that it's up in Newcastle already. So it's a Southern Hemisphere thing from, I think it's Australia or New Zealand. I think it's Australia. Quite big, impressive. The web's quite similar to Amarobius, but it makes a more extensive web. It's sort of, tends not to be flat against the surface. It's more out in the open, strung across between a gap. Yeah, watch out for this. It's likely to travel because it's obviously synanthropic. It lives in close association with humans. It's going to get moved around. So you may well get a new Vice County record looking at this. I understand it also lives in bushes as well in some parts of Britain. So one to look at, but quite a sizable spider as well. And they're stranger, these Decidae, because in the Southern Hemisphere, many of the species are intertidal. So they'll live below the high tide mark and actually hunt maritime species when the tide goes out. But this species isn't maritime. This is, I think they call it the grey house spider. So it's been transported across the world. Actually, it's South America, North America, South Africa. So another one to add to our list. Another one we're all familiar with, Angelenidae, the big house spiders that we get scuttling around our carpets and falling into our bathtubs in autumn now. These make that very characteristic sheet web that you'll find in the sheds with a sort of tubular retreat at one end. They're generally large spiders, often very attractively marked abdomens. Yeah, the web they make isn't sticky. It's sort of more of a platform for them to run on, and I guess prey falls onto it and blunders around a bit, and they rush out and grab it and go back to the tube. So yeah, not many species really compared to some of the other families, but quite obvious things, and they're actually quite difficult to identify. Some of the larger house spiders, it's a complex of 3 species, which can be quite challenging to identify. So it's not always the case that the larger species spiders are easier to identify. It's some of the smaller species are much easier than these guys to put to species. Right, Hanidae. These are very small. You can almost think of them as like the previous family, but much smaller. These are about 1 millimetre long, and they make a sort of little tangle web, little messy web, often under stones or in marsh. So this one here is Antistia elegans, got this very reddish look to it. Some of the other ones are very pallid or dark, depending on where they live. So you've got Hania nava, which you find in very dry grasslands. They'll have Hania pusillus, which tend to be sort of under big rocks or in thick marsh vegetation. So yeah, unusual thing about these are the spinnerets. If you look at them from the underside, they're in this nice uniform row. So very sort of parallel row of spinnerets there. So that's the very characteristic feature of that family. And then we come to the Linniphiidae. Well, these are the money spiders. And as you can see, lots and lots of species involved here, lots of genera, quite easy to remember. It's difficult to say how to identify these. It's generally they're the small things that you see blooming around. They've been caught on a bit of silk that they've let out and they're dispersing. They're generally black, shiny, although you'll get some of the larger genera which are more patterned. They run underneath webs. Run underneath webs. Sorry, I'm getting disturbed here. And hunt that way. So look out for these. Lots of species. And we'll have to do that now. Okay, well, I think we've virtually finished the talk now. So I guess if you're there, Gary, you can take back control and we can open the floor to questions.
Yes. Thank you very much indeed, Richard. It's an amazing number of families considering the number of species in Britain, really. And I thought you did very well with the names. There's a lot of things I wouldn't know how to begin to pronounce there. Compared to some of the other orders, they just seemed a bit, interesting named families there. But yeah, and you've raised quite a few species there that could be in the northwest if people are looking, which is very interesting. Things that spreading, things that have come in, other things in establishing. But yeah, really impressive diversity of spiders really in this country, which I learned quite a bit from that really, and it will be very useful actually just thinking of a recording to be able to click on each family on a list within the recording, and going back to your sort of notes on field recognition. That's really useful. So thank you very much for that. I'll go to questions now. I think there's just there's a couple in the chat. One from Doug there. Can you say something about Atypidae claricera? Again, this is the
Okay, well, yeah, so they're mygalomorph spiders. So in Britain, we've only got the one mygalomorph spider, and all the other spiders are araniomorphs. So the Atypidae have these chelicerae with a fang that sticks out underneath like this. And they raise it up and then they stab downwards when they're catching prey. So it's that sort of motion. Whereas all the rest of them have got these sidewards pinch. How can we show this? More like that, I suppose. So they pinch towards it one another rather than down into the ground. So if you think about Atipus, they're actually impaling the prey item downwards into the ground rather than nipping it from side to side. So yeah, they actually raise their whole body up when they're sort of in defensive mode to expose their fangs. The fangs are very long because they're having to pierce through that silk sock and impale anything that's walking on the surface. So they've obviously got to get through the sock and then jab into the prey item. And then they hold it while the venom takes effect. And then they've got these special chelicerae teeth on the underside of the chelicerae, which are like a row of almost like shark teeth. And they're specially formed, so they're quite sharp little knives. And they actually cut into the silk sock to make a slit. And then obviously it can pull the prey item in much more easily. So a lot of the other mygalomorphs, these little shark teeth aren't sharp like that. They're just essentially little cones that are used to hold the prey item against the fang, or when they're masticating up the prey, they use this in that sort of format. So yeah, it's quite an unusual thing for British spiders to be like that, and different.
And they're quite long lived, aren't they?
Yeah, I think the record's 9 years, but it wouldn't surprise me if they don't live longer than that.
And they keep the same. They stay in the same place, in the same.
Yeah. The females won't leave the burrow once they've established a burrow as a juvenile. They'll stay in that burrow unless they're disturbed. So I guess that one that was coming out of the rock face, if it ever got too big for that hole, it would have to give up and move and go elsewhere. But I've noticed that the females will actually detach their webs, the sock, at this time of year, and then they'll start excavating the burrow of soil. So it'll almost look like Hymenoptera burrows with a pile of soil over the top. And what I think they're doing is enlarging the burrow in the soil so that when they molt, and obviously get bigger, the burrow is a right proportion size for them in their new exoskeleton. So peculiar things, but they're strange in that most spiders, the Aranomorphs, when they molt, that's it. And they've matured, that's their final molt, and they don't molt again. There are some exceptions, but with Atipus and all mygalomorph families, they continuously molt once they're mature as females. So every year they'll molt. But the strange thing is that they've got spermathecae, sperm pockets where the male will deposit sperm. And when they shed their skin, they actually lose those spermathecae as well. So they effectively lose all the sperm that's been stored. So they have to remate the following year to produce eggs. So unlike other spiders, which once the females, once they've got their epigyne, they can't molt anymore. That's it. I think Segestria can. I think Segestria and Distru, I think they're, because they don't have an epigyne as such, they've got more of a, almost like a mygalomorph setup. And I can't remember the exact terminology. I think it's an entelogyne or something, haplogyne maybe. You can look that up if you need it. And yeah, so it's just a different system really. Much more simple internal structure to the genitalia too. And the male palp is more of an eyedropper. Essentially, it's a bulb with a embolus sticking off it, rather than a lot of the Aranomorphs where their bulbs actually extend out with hemolymph, the blood. So they swell up like a balloon, and they distend into a completely different shape than the relaxed state. And only then can it engage with the epigyne. So, yeah, it's quite different.
Yeah, so pretty unique among British spiders, isn't it, really, on a number of counts?
And they balloon as well, so the young will bloom. They have the potential to get to new sites as well.
Right. Thank you, Richard. Okay, a question from Nicola Round. Do juveniles of different species often look the same? As in, is it difficult to identify from juvenile, and therefore is it easier to identify many species at a particular time of year?
Yeah, difficult one that. It depends on the species. There's some juveniles that are dead easy to identify because as juveniles they can't be misidentified as anything else. So the one we just seen, Atipus, if you saw a juvenile Atipus, there's no way you could mix it up with anything else. So you could record that. But things like money spiders, the Linophiidae, a lot of the juveniles of those look identical. So you'd be guessing effectively if you were to try and put them to a species. Some of them you can. So there's that species called Balconaria acuminata with the telescope on its head in the adult male. Well, even as juveniles, the juvenile males have got a precursor of that head shape developing. So in the later stages, you can see that it's not going to turn into anything else but the Balconaria acuminata head shape. So you could identify that as a juvenile. Generally, if you're new to spiders, I'd be wary about trying to identify juvenile spiders, really. And just stick to the adults, because for 100% concrete determination, you really need to look at the epigyne or the palp, which obviously aren't visible in mature spiders. But yeah, there are some juveniles you can do, but by and large, no, not really. So you've got to pick the species that you're going to do as a juvenile. And if it's distinctive, generally they're the ones that are easier to do. So they might have a unique colour pattern for that species, or that you might be lucky and it's one of those where there's only that one species or genus in Britain. So like that lynx spider, for instance, a juvenile of that, it's not going to be anything else. If it's on a Surrey heath, it's going to be that. But you've got to be wary, because there are quite a lot of things coming into garden centres, tropical biomes. So yeah, make sure you know where you are. If you're in a sort of natural or semi-natural habitat, then you've got more confidence that it's going to be a sort of British native species. But if you're poking around a local garden centre and they've just had a new batch of plants in from Holland or cork bark in from Spain, you could be looking at all sorts coming out of those sort of imports, and they won't necessarily be in the books either, so they could confuse you.
Right, sound advice. Thanks, Richard. Okay, question from Robert. I didn't realise there were so many. Is there a rough idea of how many species in total?
Yeah, I think my last time I totted it up, it was 673 British species, but that's changing yearly. So, like I was saying, there's a lot of these that have been imported, but we don't know if they've established. So they could just be one-offs that came in, couldn't even survive in a garden centre, can't survive outside, and they just die off. So, do you count them as on the British list? My argument would probably be no. Otherwise, you could just go down the local pet shop and tick off all the tarantula spiders you see and put them on the British list. So I think if it's something that's come in established, then you can probably add it. And if it can survive outside, definitely treat it on the British list. But a lot of these accidentals, they're coming in thick and fast, and that list can be very difficult to define depending on how you want to define what a UK list is. So I would probably restrict it to things that are either native, can live outside and reproduce year on year, or maybe a long-term established in glass houses, things like, or indoors, like Pholcus, for instance, the daddy long-legged spider. It's a non-native, but it's obviously not going anywhere. It's here to stay. So yeah, tricky. So yeah, I guess 673 is probably minimum. We could be looking at 680 if you count some of those accidentals that may well establish.
Okay, yeah, that's a bit more than I thought. Thank you, Richard. Okay, so has anybody got any? There's some more questions from the chat, but I wonder if anyone's got any questions that they'd like to speak. Right now, if I don't see that anyone's got their hand up, but here's your opportunity. If you put your hand up very quickly, then I'll take a question from the floor, as it were. No? Okay, we'll carry on. Questions from the chat then. So a question from Eve B. Great talk, thank you very much. Love Pholcididae, my house spiders. Can they survive outside the house environment, and what do they eat? I always see lots of webs and not much prey.
Okay, these are the Pholcus phalangioides that you see, the daddy long-legged spiders. So yes, they can survive in favoured habitats. So generally they need about 10 degrees C all year. So you're not going to find them out in the open usually in the garden. But if you've got something like a coal bunker or, I don't know, a bin store or something like that that isn't heated, they can survive. But if you get a really cold winter, just knock them all back, and only the ones that are in man-made heated environments will survive. Now, there are exceptions to this. So I've actually found them in caves on the Great Orme. So obviously that's not heated, but it's a very favoured, protected environment. So people that obviously travel around and wild camp in tents, in caves, for want of a better word, they're obviously bringing them with them in their equipment. And yeah, sure enough, they've established there, so they can potentially survive out there. And that's probably what its natural habitat was anyway. It probably was a cave spider associated with very dry caves, and that's why it finds indoors perfect sort of environment for it. Doesn't need to drink; it gets all its moisture from its prey items, and it loves wood lice, and it will eat other spiders as well. So anything it can overpower, it will take. You'll often see the big house spiders hanging up, trussed up in a load of silk. They'll have had them. So it's not that there's an urban myth going around that they're the most venomous spider in the world, but they've just got too weaker chelicerae or fangs to pierce the skin. So that's why nobody dies of them. Well, it's a load of rubbish, actually. It's simply because they've got the power of this silk, and they've got these long legs to wrap large prey items up at distance, and tangle them up, and then once they're all trussed up, only then will they move in and just pinch a little area of the leg and then kill them with the venom. But the venom is no more stronger than any other spider, really. It's just that, I think someone called it a force multiplier using the silk, which that's how Falsidae do it. So they keep their soft body well out of the way, and they just waft the silk on top of them. So if you don't like mosquitoes and stuff in your house and wood lice crawling through your house, falsids are brilliant to have in the house, but they'll eat everything they can get and pretty much anything that moves. I'm not sure I've seen them eating each other, though. They do seem to be a bit picky in that respect.
Yeah, you don't see them moving around very well. I don't see them moving around very much. Are they pretty nocturnal then in their hunting?
No, if you've got them in the corner of your rooms, up in the cornices, they're there often. And they're generally like if you've got furniture up against the wall where it's a bit sheltered, maybe a bit dusty, and people don't disturb the webs as much with the hoover. That's where they'll be. But yeah, you can go into some garden sheds that are dry and warm, and you'll see loads and loads, because obviously there's a lot more prey availability coming in from outside then.
No, I see them, but I just don't see them moving around. I don't see them hunting, really. They just seem to sit there.
Yeah, in winter, they have this very unusual stance as well. So if they're a bit cold, they actually sit flush against the wall and splay their legs out in a very characteristic shape, often facing downwards, rather than sitting out in their web ready to sort of detect any prey. But yeah, they generally don't move. If they're well fed and sat up in their web, they'll just stay there. It's only if they're not catching enough prey will they up sticks and go and try and find a better place to set the web up to catch more food. So you will see the males walking around. I've seen males sort of coming down off the ceiling on a single strand of silk sometimes. Yeah, generally not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, question from Sabina George. What are the difficulties trying to identify spiders via photographs?
There's a controversial one. I think somebody wants to call it pentaxonomy, like Pentax, the camera brand. It's difficult is that you've got no proof. So if somebody sends you a photograph and they say, "Oh, it's that," well, you just have to take their word for it. There's often no specimen on alcohol to check that identification from photographs. So you almost have to take people's word for it. Now, you can be overconfident identifying from photographs, definitely, because a lot of spiders do look the same. And as I've said, some you have to dissect to be certain on the species. So there's no way any photograph is ever going to help you separate those species. But in saying that, there are some very distinctive British spiders that you can do from photographs. And things like the lynx spider, Pisora mirabilis, some of the Dolomides, you can do them. Obviously, not the rare one. That's only restricted to certain parts of Britain. Atipus, obviously, from a photograph you could do, but even then, you don't know if it's Atipus or whether it's something that's been brought in from abroad and just happens to look like Atipus. So if you want a watertight identification, really, you have to do microscopy. But a lot of the things like garden spider, for instance, an adult female garden spider in September, photographed on the web, obvious. Adult female wasp spider, Argiope. There's nothing else in Britain like it. Yeah. These are the spiders people don't actually collect because they're so obvious. You don't really need to look at them down a microscope. So in that respect, yes, you can take photographs and that's perfectly acceptable as a record because on all probability, it's going to be that species that's established in Britain. It's not going to be one from abroad if it's numerous and a lot. But obviously be careful around sort of senses of importation. That it could be a lookalike from the continent that you just assume, oh, it must be the British one, and it might not be. So yeah, use it with caution. You can identify some. Things like money spiders, the small little dark money spiders, forget it because the resolution on most cameras are just not good enough to pick up the features like the position of the Trichobothria along the leg segment. And you might get a photograph that only shows one aspect of your specimen, whereas you actually need to see another part of the spider to be certain on the species identification. And by and large, we always take top photographs, don't we? We never take underside shots of things because we want a nice, attractive human thing with it. I think somebody once said to me, all photographs have got to have a picture of an eye in it, even of a potato. And I think we all fall into that. But in many cases, the underside of a spider is probably more informative than the top side if you've got a very distinctive epigyne. And the resolution of cameras is improving all the time. So we're getting things where you can zoom in and actually see some of the detail on the palp or the epigyne. And so, yeah, it's hit and miss. If you've got a very high resolution picture, you can probably identify more specimens that you photograph than if it's just with a smartphone, which are optimized for small screen resolutions, really.
Is there any money spiders you can do from a photo?
Yeah. So Vulcanaria acuminata with that strange head, you could certainly do that. Some of the large patterned ones, some of the Linifia or Narini, I suppose you can do them from photographs. But yeah, I'd err on the side of caution, really. I wouldn't make it a thing to do, really. But certainly some of the larger spiders are more distinctive and unique, I suppose, in the British fauna you can do. Wolf spiders I wouldn't really attempt to from photographs. There's one or two of them that you can do, but things like Pardosa, yeah. I guess if you collected them on a site and you're really familiar with that site and you know it inside and out and you know that, oh, this is the only wolf spider of that species that occurs on the site, then you photograph it again. But then you could probably be fairly confident. But yeah, I'd be cautious really with photographs and identification, really.
Okay, all right, thanks, Richard. Okay, another question from Kirsten Foster. Which families are we most likely to find in houses and gardens? Kirsten's in London. If there are too many to mention, don't worry, she says.
Right, so I'm guessing urban setting. So I mean, I think London, you've got quite a few options really. So I think on your windowsills you'll have Zygella exnotata, so that's an aranid, orb-web spider. So pretty much most houses in Britain will have that very common spider. It makes an orb web, but one of the sectors is usually doesn't have the cross pieces of silk there, not the radial threads, the other threads. So you'll see that it's not really mature at this time of year. It's more a back end of the year when you see the big adult females. You will have house spiders, Tegenaria eratogena, usually eratogena actually, which is actually an anagram of Tegenaria. So who says taxonomists don't have a sense of humour? So yeah, eratogena you'll get, probably Philodromidae, Philodromus. You might see them sitting on your outside walls. Occasionally, if you leave a window open, you've got a very sort of well-vegetated garden, they're likely to come in that way. So you might just get one accidentally wandering into your house. Very common wolf spider, if you've got a bit of grass in your garden, is Pardosa amantata. That's the little brown wolf spider that carries its egg sac on its abdomen. That's the usual one that you'll get in a garden. Zoropsidae, that introduced one, that London speciality, you'll get that Zoropsis spinimanima, really big. If you search for that, you'll probably find that in London. What else could you get? Salticids, the jumping spiders, so zebra spider, Salticus secenicus, very common around houses. And there's the other jumping spider. See if I can even remember it. What it is? Talavera aquipes, I think it is. Or is it? No. Pseudoeophorus laniger. Sorry, and that is essentially only found on roofs of buildings. So if you're up doing sort of building work and fixing your roof, you'll see it hopping around the slates or the tiles, and that comes wandering into houses. So that's a very common spider that's essentially tied to houses. But that wasn't always in Britain. That it appeared in Britain in the 1950s and has spread up through UK. So it's quite nice. We've got quite a dynamic fauna with spiders. So things do come in and establish, and then they're everywhere. So yeah, so there's quite a range of spiders. The odd crab spider that you can get in gardens, probably most likely is Xysticus cristatus. Probably the one you'd find. Maybe Miss Humina vatia, if you've got quite a flowery garden, get that in a garden setting. But yeah, there's lots of little money spiders will turn up as well. And Amarobius similis, of course, that one that makes the bluish doily web. That's a ubiquitous in gardens. So yeah, you've got a lot to go at there, Kirsten.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, you sure have, Kirsten, and on your house as well as in your garden by the sound of it, really. Thanks, Richard, again. So another question from Doug. Do any UK spiders predate harvestmen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never seen them do so, no. But that's not to say they don't. Things with a lot of harvestmen, they produce a very unpleasant fluid from these odoriferous glands at the side of their head. So I guess they look quite weak and puny, the harvestmen, but they do have quite a range of defences that they can use. I think I've seen some tangled up in webs, sort of husks of ones, but it's as though they've just got tangled in the silk and have died as a result of that, rather than the spider actually attacking them and eating them. And obviously, being quite soft-bodied things that wouldn't really leave many remains behind. I think if anything's going to eat them, it would be the Theridiidae. They're quite aggressive spiders in terms of what they'll take, and they don't chew their prey up. They just punch a little hole out and then inject the saliva through into the body cavity of the prey item, and then suck the liquid back in rather than mashing it up. So I guess they might bypass those odoriferous glands and the fluid and simply eat them. But no, I've never seen any harvestmen being actively eaten by a spider.
Thanks, Richard. Well, if you haven't seen that, it's probably quite telling, really. That's interesting.
My eyes aren't what they used to be.
Okay, another question from Kirsten. Here, are introduced species causing any concern in terms of their effect on local ecosystems or biodiversity?
Yeah, I'd say generally not. A lot of the introduced spiders have sort of occupied a niche that I guess some of the native ones aren't already holding. So they're quite generalists into spiders in terms of what they eat. So it's not like they're selectively going for one thing and just eating that and causing the demise of one particular prey item. Obviously, the birds hammer them quite heavily as well. So I guess there's some argument that Steatoda nobilis could be classified as an invasive non-native rather than just a non-native. When it establishes at some sites, it can be the dominant spider, and pretty much every surface is the web of Steatoda nobilis. So you do sort of think, well, actually, this is probably pushing other species out of the way. Now, in many ways, that's not a problem with synanthropic species, because spiders that are tied around your houses, which a lot of these newly arrived spiders generally are, because that's how they're getting transported in. They're coming in with human products, that building materials, or things that are already around human habitation. So what's happening there is that they're often ousting species that have already been introduced anyway, so they're not native. So I wouldn't worry so much. But yeah, I have found Steatoda nobilis away from human habitation on the Surrey heaths, but only a single juvenile. Now, if that was to sort of blossom and become the dominant spider in that habitat, then you could start to worry that it would be having an impact on some of our rarer spiders and other invertebrates. But yeah, I don't think there's been any examples in Britain, at least, of real problems happening with spiders. But obviously, you've got to keep an eye. But at the end of the day, what can you do? You've just got to maintain your biosecurity. Try to avoid these things being imported, because obviously the person that brought in Japanese knotweed thought it was just going to be an attractive garden plant that would be planted in a garden. They didn't realise it would spread and cause so much harm in the wild, really. So yeah, you can't assume that everything that comes in, but most things that come in are not going to be a problem. They're just going to fit into our fauna and hang around our gardens and make it a bit more interesting, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you're right there, really, Richard. With the biosecurity is the main thing. There must be spiders out there in the world that do have potential to be like a harlequin or something, but we just don't know it, and we'll never know. Won't ever know until it is allowed in.
It is possible that Decidae, the Bedumna longinqua, that's just starting to establish, could be that spider. But I think because a lot of these are coming in from more subtropical climes, that they're always going to be restricted to synanthropic habitats. They're not going to, for instance, they're never going to live on the top of the Snowdonia Mountains or Reri, because they just haven't got that ecological niche that can survive at that temperature, and it's just not the right thing. So I guess I'm less worried about things that are in really unusual habitats.
Yeah.
But certainly around human habitation has got a potential to bring in new invasive species, I suppose.
Yeah. Right, a lot of food for thought there, really. Okay, another question from Doug. If you find a spider in tropical fruit, what should you do with it after capturing it?
Well, probably the best thing is take it to your local museum. They can obviously send it to somebody or alert somebody who's actually working on it. There is somebody who's working on a paper on these adventive spiders that have come in. So yeah, do that. I think there's already a lot of sort of things in place with some of the fruit importers, that if they do have to keep a record of what comes in and what they find, and they do tend to send them to the right people to get identified. Obviously, they don't want highly venomous spiders coming in and potentially being a threat to customers or their own staff. But by and large, what comes in tends to be those sparacids, those huntsman spiders, which they're big and impressive, but ultimately harmless to humans. They could give you a bite, but you're not going to lose sleep over it, really. But what I'd recommend is just send it to somebody who would know it. I can put you in contact with somebody who's working on these if you need to, and they can arrange for it to be collected if they're nearby or sent to them. And obviously they'd be keen to identify what it is. So always worth doing that.
Great. Okay, another question from Robert. What resources would you recommend to continue to further your spider interest?
Okay. First thing is buy this book if it doesn't keep disappearing.
Oh,
Yeah, even I've disappeared now. Okay, so British Spiders by Princeton. Very affordable book, packed full of information. It gives you a lot of the microscopic features for separating the families. And it even grades the spiders on whether you can identify them by eye, as an earlier question alluded to, and those that you need a microscope to. So that'll be a good first introduction to get into spiders. There are more advanced books if you want to go down the microscopy route, generally Roberts books. You can get a smaller abridged version of Roberts if you don't want to go in big, or you can get the full size Roberts, which will cost you a couple of £100. I think that British Spiders by Princeton, very rich in photographs, really accessible, written in non-technical language, and everything's explained as well. So I could recommend nothing better than that. And obviously, I'd have to plug joining the Arachnological Society as well. And you could even just sign up if you're a Twitter user, go on the British Spiders Twitter feed, which is very useful. It's just good to see what's coming in. They'll retweet photographs and post IDs too. There are some Facebook groups that identify British spiders. You're into your social media, it'd be worth joining those for some help with that from there. There's very experienced people on there that are moderators that can help you with identifications and guidance. So yeah, there's lots out there to get into.
Great, thanks, Richard. Sabina George was just commenting on that. It was interesting that many are free living and just used web for egg sacs or resting. I thought that too. It felt like half of the families you were saying that actually they're just, not creating webs to capture. They're just roaming, hunting actively.
Even some of the money spiders don't make webs to capture. So I think some of the wild canarias, I think somebody mentioned to me that they've never seen them in webs. And come to think of it, I've never seen them in webs. And I think the thought is that they're free living hunters and just predate other spiders rather than other invertebrates. So yeah, it's very useful to actually see your spider in context, to appreciate the shape of the web that it's living in and the habitat, because that also narrows down your options rather than slavishly working through a key to try and work out what family it is. If it's sat in an orb web, for instance, you've instantly reduced it down to 3 or 4 families or thereabouts, and realistically probably only 2 families in truth, based on rarity.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Richard. There doesn't appear to be any more questions now in the chat. Yeah, in very impressive depth to all your answers there, Richard. You've been studying spiders for how long?
Oh, probably 35 years, maybe
35 years. Yeah, amazing, really amazing depth.
What I don't make up, what I don't know, I just make up anyway, Gary.
Right, no, great stuff. And you've had lots of sort of nice comments and thank yous in the chat as we've been talking. So yeah, I'm really very grateful for this evening. I'll just give one quick opportunity now for anyone to ask a question if they put their hand up, or they can just unmute themselves very quickly. Oh, okay. We do have another one from David. RG. I recently observed a jumping spider quenching its thirst or eating watermelon. Is this behavior with fruit common?
Yeah, I'm not so sure in the wild. I think it's possibly more a case that I don't know what context it was in. Maybe it was in a very dry house and it just happened to come across this water source that was a cut watermelon and thought, well, why not? But strangely enough, there is actually a vegetarian spider that is a jumping spider, and it doesn't predate prey items. It actually feasts on these little bodies that a certain acacia tree produces for ants to eat. So it actually lives just by eating these ant body things that are produced by the tree. So yeah, I think because Salticidae, these jumping spiders, are so flexible, they are quite opportunistic. And yeah, I've heard of spiders eating peas and stuff, but I suppose it's not a case that they're actively looking for fruit to eat. So if they had a choice, they'd rather be eating a juicy fly, I guess. It's just a case that I either drink this available moisture now or I desiccate and die. So I think that's more the case that what was happening there.
Right, yeah, yeah. I've never seen something like that before. Okay, well, I think we'll call it a night at that point. Thank you again, Richard. Yeah, it's been fascinating, and yeah, it'll be really useful to be able to go back through the recording as well. And clearly, everybody else has really enjoyed it tonight as well. So yeah, and for everyone else, thank you for coming. And yeah, we'd love to see you at a at a workshop in the museum. We don't not sure we've got any spider ones for the rest of this year. I can't remember now. But we often do them anyway with Richard or Rich Berkman. We've done them with as well at the museum or in other places. Yeah, and you saw there's more webinars. There's the recording days go up to September this year, or we have ID surgery days, or you can just come to the museum and use the facilities at Liverpool. And anytime really during the week, just get in touch with us. So really, yeah, please make use of the opportunities to come to events and learn more and further your interest in spiders or whatever else it is in terms of invertebrates. We'd love to see you. So yeah, that's it for now. Have a good rest of your night, everybody, and see you again soon.